Welcome back to the Register Kettle. I'm Brandon Vigliarolo, and this week it's all about what the latest quarter of tech earnings are telling us about that AI bubble. With me this week is our editor in chief, Matt Rosoff, and systems editor, Tobias Mann, to pick apart this haystack of earnings news to look for the bubble popping needle that might be hiding within. Guys, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so it's been kind of a mess of up and down earnings from big tech this quarter, has been reported in the past week. And not all of it seems bad, but despite that, a lot of investors seem pretty worried about the state of things. Matt, you've been watching this pretty closely. Can you break this down and try to give us an understanding of what the numbers mean for both investors and the state of AI?
Yeah, it seems as if we are in what often happens toward the final phases of a speculative time in the markets, what might be
Hmm.
called a bubble, which is you have these absolutely wild, insane swings in stock prices. And these are not penny stocks. These are, humongous, massive cap tech stocks. You have Apple down 10% today simply because they warned that their next quarter might not be as good as expected because memory prices and other component prices are so high.
Right.
Um, you have IBM losing as more value in a single day after its last earnings call, or actually it was after warning than it had lost since 1987, since Black Monday in
Wow.
1987. So you basically have these large cap, massive tech stocks that are most of the value of the stock market acting like penny stocks, and that tends not to be a great sign. That's usually when investors don't know what to make of the current state of things and are trying
Hmm.
sort of desperately to figure out where to put their money. And there's a lot of tea leaf reading. So, it has varied widely. Meta, investors didn't like what Meta was saying. Their cash flow decreased dramatically because of all the capex spending they're doing building these new data centers. And everybody sort of freaked out on that, and there was a big sell on that.
It was a
Big sell
massive
on
capex swing, right? They're under $1 billion in free cash flow, and they had
yeah.
8.5 billion last year at this time. I mean, that's huge.
Y Yeah, and this is all data centers to build out something to do with
Mhm.
AI, and I mean, I think probably in the end, Mark Zuckerberg at Meta has probably figured, well, we're just going to build as much as we can now, and the AI will help us target our ads and help our core business enough that it'll be worth it, and we'll rent out whatever excess capacity we have at some point in the future. But I don't know that. That's speculation.
Right,
Point
right.
being, this is a lot of investors seem to be sort of reading tea leaves. Amazon is up 15% today. So, and same story there. Their capex went up. Their estimates
Mhm.
went up. But for whatever reason, because AWS grew faster than expected, and because everybody was looking at Amazon Web Services in their core business, they said, "Oh, but Amazon is doing the smart thing, and they're investing in AI, but it's good." And it actually, if you read Corey Quinn, who is an analyst who writes for us often about AWS, but his main job is sort of helping customers figure out AWS licensing and pricing and so forth. He dug into the earnings a little bit, and part of what investors liked was AWS margins, but some of that margin was created by hedging on energy prices. So it's this very obtuse kind of, and all the big companies do these kinds of things. It's their treasury departments are basically always kind of figuring out how to play games and maximize. It's all perfectly legal. It's not fraud or anything even close
Sure.
to that, but it's not the core. You sort of have to back out this weird one-time um, energy price hedging strategy that worked to their advantage, and then you look at that, and their margins are right where they were expected to be.
Right,
Um,
and I think he even
you look
mentioned that they said in that in earnings call that they don't expect that to have the same bump in Q3, right? Like, it's not
right,
it's not
and
gonna
yet
be there next quarter.
And yet investors are saying, "Throw our money into Amazon, up 15% today." It's bonkers.
Yeah.
You have the big chip stocks had these huge crashes earlier this month. There was sort of this overnight success, hedge fund situational awareness, created by, I think he's 24. He's a young pup. He worked for
Mhm.
FTX, which you'll remember was Sam
Mhm.
Bankman-Fried's
Oh, yeah.
crypto company that imploded after there were some fraud charges brought there, and he created this hedge fund, and
And now it's
I think
imploding is what it looks like.
it's imploding, and, the take on that is he's a decent stock picker, but he didn't hedge properly and was way over levered, and so you have, $45 billion turning into $10 billion. These are the kinds of things you see toward the end or as a bubble is starting to burst. So I've been seeing a lot of memes, on the forums that I follow, the AI forums, and a lot of people are in the AI community are saying AGI is already here. We just don't realize it yet. And I would counter that by saying the AI bubble pop is already here. We don't just realize it yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually speaking of Corey's story, I was digging into that, earlier today, and I was really struck by some of the things he pointed out, aside from the margin bit, right? Like he mentioned how, you know, uh, they discussed AWS discussed their chip business, which I'm sure Tobias knows doesn't really sell any chips, and
Right.
they actually they were all up and they were having revenue up, but they basically, as he reported, they conflated their chip revenue with EC2 instance revenue, you know, and the same thing with the way they were counting their massive investment in Anthropic. I think they just what they accounted for, I think $53.4 billion due to some deals with Anthropic they made in the past quarter. And he said, but if you follow one Anthropic dollar through the earnings release, it's counted in AI business revenue, chips business, and AWS segment revenue, right? And he said, like all these things, all this kind of massaging and padding and beautifying is all in the service of the massive capital expenditures that
Right.
Amazon, like other companies, is undertaking. You know, and I think there's another quote that I thought was quite telling. He said, "The demand underwriting 220 billion in capex is concentrated today in a handful of AI labs, one of which Amazon happens to own a meaningful piece of. When the
Yeah.
broader enterprise adoption wave remains a forecast." You know,
Exactly.
as I'm reading this, by the end of that story, I was kind of struck with the question it left me with was, is this entire quarter of earnings, is it just an industry trying to pump air into this thing to stave off a collapse?
I don't know if it's so much as trying to pump air. It's just
Mhm.
this is the bet that has been made, and they are continuing to make this bet because it would be it's
It's
too
like the
risky
sunk
to sort of
cost
pull
fallacy.
out.
Say it again, Tobias?
It's like the sunk cost fallacy. They're too
Yeah,
deep
I was just
in
gonna
at
say
this
maybe that was
point
more the case
to
than saying
climb
pumping air in.
out,
Yeah, it
and
was
so
yeah.
y there's not much they can do other than to keep putting money into this. Um,
Mhm.
if imagine if next quarter Amazon stopped and said, "Actually, we're not going to spend any more money on CapEx on this," how the market would react to that.
Yeah, probably not well.
Right. Right. And I think, again, the fundamentals here, it's really OpenAI and Anthropic, massively valued companies. They have these humongous commitments, to build, and they're generating real revenue on the order of 20 billion a year. That's not nothing. They're
Sure.
real companies. There's real demand. It's just the size of their commitments, is predicated on the idea that at some point AI can replace a lot of economic value that is, currently residing today in all kinds of other industries, not just the IT industry. And, if you believe that, then these numbers can make sense. And you can say, yeah, let's just spend like crazy because at some point, most of what the economy runs on will be somehow powered by or replaced by AI.
Mhm.
I think a skeptic would say a lot of this is will be someday, maybe, and we don't actually quite see it yet.
Yeah, going back to that forecast line from Corey, right? This is all predicated on things that people hope will happen.
Well, and
Right.
I think one of the most dire examples of this is Meta, which has just been an absolute mess in terms of its AI development team. You know, part of it was that there was a bidding war over engineers, which they overspent on talent.
Mhm.
But the other component of it is that Meta is spending just a tremendous amount of money on Capex to build these data centers, some of which are gonna supposedly cost $50 billion to finish, and they don't really have much to show for it. Uh, what they can show is that it's supposedly making their recommender systems work better,
Mm.
but then they're spending all this money, and then there's talk of them becoming a going from a hyperscale to a public cloud provider, something I would argue is, just inevitable for any sufficiently large, infrastructure, company. But, uh, it is really hard to justify that kind of spending when what do you have to show for it? I mean, use
Yeah.
Spark is fine. It's not on par with anything Anthropic or OpenAI are doing. And their track record for putting out models that people are willing to use, want to use, hasn't been great. They've had some duds along the way, so they don't even have the confidence that OpenAI or Anthropic have built up, uh, that the next model is going to be better. With Meta, you don't know that.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think also when we say build data centers, data center infrastructure build out, they're easy words to say and they're easy words to put in a press release. Tobias, you can talk to this better than I can, but these things are tremendously complicated. They're, multiple buildings you're dealing with permitting and siting and water and power and local protests and networking and are the GPUs even available and are the CPUs even available and and on and on and on.
Yeah.
So, you know, Apple, which has the historical greatest supply chain expertise in the history of the world, they're running into constraints on the supplies for phones and iPads and things. I can't imagine that some of these companies that are intending to build these massive data centers are not going to soon face similar constraints. And then that doesn't even get into energy costs and you have
Oh,
oil
it's
prices and
a
so forth. That's bonkers.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a speculative rabbit hole that you can keep going down because, uh you know, hyperscalers, cloud providers do build their own data centers, but they also lease a lot of capacity as a hedge because it's
Mhm.
easier to walk away from a lease than it is to commit to building and maintaining your own facilities. And Microsoft has talk about prior scares going back a couple years. There was a point where Microsoft was pulling out of their leases because and everybody was freaking out like this is the sign, this is the canary in the coal mine. In reality, the hardware changed and none of the facilities they had signed initial contracts for, not full commitments, but
Mhm.
kind of promissory notes could actually support the hardware. So, of
Mhm.
course, they killed those agreements because it was for a facility that couldn't take the infrastructure they wanted to deploy. But there's also a problem with that. Historically, colocation has been treated like a real estate deal.
Yeah.
And that's fine for air cooled data centers because it's
Mhm.
pretty predictable and the infrastructure is generally fairly simple. The power constraints are reasonable. You don't need a ton of facility water going through there. You don't need the same degree of backup generators. And usually those facilities have different uptime requirements to them. With AI data centers, it's completely different. The scale at which these things are being deployed means you have to who before you even break ground, you have to have figured out contracts with the utilities to find out whether or not they're even going to give you the power or will build the substations to supply it. You have to figure out where you're gonna get water for this because these are such high power consumption facilities that evaporative cooling is the most cost effective way to do it. That's changing a little bit, but neither here nor there. Right now, you have to be figuring all of that out. And you can't even get the infrastructure to put into the facility until until Nvidia and AMD know that it exists, because they don't want allocations sitting on pallets for 6 months while they figure it out. And the supply chain has gotten so screwed up where, yeah, you can do everything right, but now everything's liquid cooled, and the supply chain constraints are so bad that you might be on a wait list for 6 months or a year to get all of the plumbing and the manifolds just to get everything hooked up.
And that's all
Yeah.
assuming geopolitics doesn't screw the entire pooch
Oh, yeah.
and leave them even further out,
There's all
right?
other kinds of things going on. And that's on
Yeah.
the that is that's the supply side of all this. There's the demand side too, which again, I remain somewhat unconvinced that LLMs and what we call AI is in fact going to replace most economic activity.
Mhm.
I don't know what everybody else is seeing. I am hearing they're very good for certain types of functions. You know, are you going to have them write all your production code? No. Are they great for prototyping? Yes. Can they help an experienced coder do more with less? Yes. So it's again, it's kind of this mixed bag. Are they going to replace all medical professionals with medical advice? No.
Definitely not,
So
based on the error rates we've seen in some stories I've
there
written and seen lately.
Yeah, I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was yesterday or a couple days ago, where they were talking about companies are starting to hire again. All of these people that we laid off ostensibly because of AI, well, it turns out we actually need all these people after all. And you're starting to see tech companies hire again. And you're starting to see a lot of folks who thought AI could replace customer service. No, you know what? Even a smart chatbot is still subpar compared with an actual human on the phone who can figure out what you're talking about and resolve your question. So again, I
Yeah.
think you've got this massively overstated ease of, "Oh, yeah, the supply we'll figure this out. We'll just keep plowing Capex into these data centers, and they'll get built." And then you've got the demand side and, saying, "And it's gonna replace all economic value." Well, will it? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen any evidence of that so far, right? Like you said, right? There's the people are hiring again. There's still reports regularly that are talking about, AI ROI for enterprise, right?
Yeah,
And how it's just still not there. It's been 3 years that we've been writing stories about this, about the fact that the ROI is not there, that the people can't find a use for this, that they're
yeah.
just trying to plug it in to find something to give it a purpose for.
And it gets hard to think about this because, an AI booster will say, "Oh, you're using outdated information," "You're just saying that AI is not real at all and it's completely useless." No, that's not what we're saying. I'm just saying it's not going to replace all economic value to the level at which Anthropic and OpenAI are valued and the way that this is being reflected in some of these old former public market valuations of the big suppliers to this whole thing. So it's a complicated phase. I think we're starting to see the deflation now, and I think that's you look at most of the big tech earnings this quarter, almost with the exception of Amazon, I think almost all the others um, lost pretty significant amounts of value after they reported earnings.
Mhm.
Microsoft did, Alphabet did, Meta did, and Apple did. So that's
Yep.
4 out of the 5. And I think we have, NVIDIA as well. Some of the chip makers have seen some wild swings in their stock prices. So this is what it looks like. I guess I would sort of say then, okay, well, we're the Register. We're not the Wall Street Journal or CNBC. Who cares? Like, what difference does this make? And I guess there the sort of the caution is the product sets and the functions that you see today from these big frontier LLM makers may not be what you see a year from now or 5 years from now.
Mhm.
It's very important to understand these are still speculative businesses. This is not an Oracle database. This is not Office 365. This is not Google Search or Google Cloud or AWS. These are who knows what they're going to cost and what's going to be available. Who knows what's going to be built around them. A lot of people are saying sort of the harnesses become important and the models actually don't matter all that much. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Tobias.
So the harnesses are interesting because it's an extension of context and reasoning capability for the models. The models are largely transactional, and the harnesses allow them to go beyond that. Go retrieve additional information, think about it some more, go take an action, look at the reaction to that action, and perform tasks more reliably with less hallucination, and it works better for some things than others. Code assistants are the shining example of this. But the problem with code assistance is that code either runs or it doesn't, it compiles or it doesn't, and if it doesn't compile, it just triggers another loop of the system. That doesn't really work in transactional industries if you start looking at customer service. You can't just loop through and get the right answer when you're talking to a customer on the phone, when the robot or the model is talking to a customer on the phone. They need to get it right the first or at least the second time for it to
Mhm.
be any better than a person. Um, and it really needs to be better than a person because human contact is something that should be valued, and people on the phone, at least my personally, when I have to call somebody up, it feels a lot better talking to a person than going, "Oh, crap. I gotta talk to the
Yeah.
robot now." So
And it's
Yeah, no one wants to do
I
that.
think they're finding that in the end, it's probably cheaper too to have a warehouse full of customer support reps at 30 or $50 an hour, or whatever they get paid, versus burning infinite tokens on these loops that don't really resolve the
Yeah,
customer
and you
call in
can
the
you
first
can
place.
give them access to AI that helps them surface information more quickly, right? So you still get the benefit of that.
right.
Because I mean, I think there obviously there's benefit in AI, right? It surfaces
Yeah.
information, it does things, right? But I guess so to kind of bring this back to why this matters to our readers, IT professionals. It seems like essentially what this entire thing and like Matt, what you were saying is what it should tell everyone in this space is not to jump in with both feet right now. That this is not something that's done and ready to go.
I'd say that you should be hedging right now.
Yeah.
If you're moving into this space, you should be doing so in a deliberate fashion. And I think that you should be aware of the uncertainties. Matt brought up a really excellent point is that right now the climate is perfect for a squeeze on customers to see just how
Mhm.
sticky the products have become. I've said this in the past, but when you have these supply chain constraints, when you have investors looking for evidence of a return on investment and ability to deliver a profit, there is incredible pressure to raise prices. And so when you get to something like code assistants, which are probably the stickiest example of AI being useful for something, I think what we're going to continue seeing over the next 6 months, if this whole thing doesn't fall apart before then, is that prices are going to rise rapidly because there is a understood value associated with this, and they have to demonstrate that to their investors.
But we just saw OpenAI drop the prices on 2 GPT-5.6 models significantly, right? And they didn't say why. They said it was because they maximized their ability to do more with less, right? But I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Tobias? Do you think it's more of that, or do you think it's more like people don't want to pay for this, so we've got to adjust the price
So
down?
there's you gotta watch something because harnesses have changed how you can look at the cost structure of these things. If you look at
Okay.
cost per million tokens, it might look lower, but if the model consumes 4 times as many tokens in order
Mm.
to deliver a meaningful result, it's not cheaper. And
Uh-huh.
so we saw Tom did Claiborne, one of our software senior software reporters, had an excellent piece looking at how Anthropic's latest models use a tremendous number of tokens in order to deliver the result. So, sure, OpenAI's latest models might look less expensive from an API standpoint, which is great for marketing. But if it's using twice as many tokens, that's not the same thing. And that's somewhat dependent on the harness. But it is also dependent on how much reasoning effort is put into it, how they're routing the models. And so I caution anybody who's looking at API prices saying they dropped the price. Well, but is it less expensive?
Yeah. They drop the price, but go count the number of tokens you're tossing into that thing and see if it's cheaper, right? That's yeah,
Right.
like you said, it's a good marketing, good thing to say for marketing purposes, but the rub being how much you're actually using.
Yeah, and again, I think as you've written about, we've seen open weights models becoming as effective as these, more expensive ones from the frontier labs for a lot of
Mhm.
functions. And so I don't know. I guess the advice for practitioners is test a lot of things, look to run stuff locally,
Yeah.
prototype, check your expenses before you move all your workflows over to agents and agentic AI. It's a sort of we're still in this test and watch your expenses carefully phase unless you are, again, a huge tech company like Google who can afford to have their employees token max for 6 months.
Yeah.
Most businesses are not in that state.
And we're
Yeah.
seeing this in a couple different stages right now where particularly as NVIDIA tries to enlarge its total addressable market and de-risk its reliance on hyperscalers to drive profit, they're increasingly looking down market towards enterprises and how do they approach enterprises. And one of the big things that they're pushing right now is this idea of, yeah, you might still use GPT or Claude for some stuff, but you don't need to be using those models for everything. You
Mhm.
can run, so a vision language model to skim through invoices and write up summaries and or transcribe them or whatever the case may be, and it can be incredibly effective at that one thing, and it way more cost effective to run on a $13,000 GPU in a server in your data center or your colo or rented from AWS even. They don't care how you get to the GPUs, just that you're using them. But there is a recognition that there is a cost component of this that can be addressed somewhat by smaller targeted models. And it seems like we have this pendulum swing every couple of months where it goes all the way out to giant models and then all the way back to small models, and different folks are at different stages. The Chinese models are just getting enormous right now. Kimi
Mhm.
K3 is 2.8 trillion parameters. I mean, that's bigger than GPT-4 was, a couple years ago. So I mean, like, they're as big and as capable as the frontier models, which is putting pressure on stuff, but it is I don't think that is necessarily what enterprises necessarily need. And so
Mhm.
looking at smaller models, evaluating targeted use cases might offer you some relief from this and but allow you not to miss out on the opportunities afforded by the technology.
Yeah, we'll see, right? It's again, it's a moving target, it's a moving thing, it's a thing that's still developing, and it might be shrinking, but we'll see. We'll be here to talk about it on the register. I am sure this is, the topic du jour. I mean, not even of the day, it's topic of the year, of the decade, maybe. But we'll be here to talk about it on the register. Thanks for joining us, guys, and we will talk to you all soon.